that we're a little bit over time, but in this last session, we have a really remarkable voice, and I hope you will all give this voice your deepest attention. So I would like to give a very warm welcome to the author and scholar, Professor Ganesh Devi, who is a polymath, cultural activist, thinker, literary critic, and educationalist, known mainly for making the People's Linguistic Survey of India and founding the Adivasi Academy. He writes in 3 languages, Hindi, Marathi, and English. His first book, After Amnesia of 1992, was already a remarkable book, and since he has published extensively in the fields of literary criticism, anthropology, education, literary linguistics, and philosophy. And his publications include Countering Violence in 2019 and a 5-volume series of key terms in Indigenous studies. He was professor of English at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, professor of humanities at the DAIICT, Gandhinagar, and Obaid Siddiqui Chair Professor at National Center for Biological Sciences, TIFR, Bangalore. He is currently Senior Professor of Eminence and Sumaya School of Civilization, Bombay. A recipient of Padma Shri, Devi has received several international awards and lifetime honors for his work for Adivasis and nomadic tribes, as well as for his writing. In this session, which is titled Time and Space in the Epistemic Resistance of Indigenous Worldviews, Professor Devi will explore the distinctive ways in which indigenous communities across the globe conceptualize time and space. So without further ado, I ask you please to give a very warm welcome to Professor Devi. Thank you for coming to the stage.
Bhavna Ben and Katya, all eminent artists, art critics, art historians, curators, museologists, ladies and gentlemen. I feel very guilty speaking this evening using the English language. I wish I could speak for this audience in Hindi, लेकिन हिंदी में गाना है सबसे मधुर गीत वही जो अपना दर्द बताते हैं. Perhaps I will stick to English. I was extremely reluctant in accepting this invitation, very affectionate invitation, because I thought after crossing the age of 75, I should stay silent. But despite of that unwillingness, I decided to accept it because your invitation made me think. It really started me thinking on what is epistemology, what is that resistance of the indigenous, what is the contemporary normal, and whatever few thoughts I could put together in my mind, I am going to present before you. I believe after spending about 30 odd years working with Adivasis and learning from them, this symposium is perhaps a turning point. This reminds me of a meeting that was held in Calcutta in 1787, where William Jones spoke about connection between different languages, and that triggered a discussion in Europe about the idea of civilization. William Jones's admiration for ancient similarities between the ancient Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Persian was only a trigger for the British, who were already excited with books like The Decline and Fall of Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon's, and they started thinking of those ancient people who had built such beautiful cities, such majestic places. These were the people in Britain whose villages were devastated, and people were pouring into places like London and making places like Manchester into cities filled with the poor. And it is in those bleak times that the imagination, the imagined past, the lost past of glorious cities such as the Indus was not known at that time, but ancient cities started beckoning them. And they thought, oh, if one has to talk of civilization, it is that. This theme of epistemology brings me to think of what epistemology is. The Greeks were happy with logos and with gnosis, two terms they use for knowledge. Logos was knowledge that was put out. Gnosis was knowledge that was experienced. Logos was a noun. Gnosis was a kind of a verb. It was not a thing, but an action. It was a verbal noun, if you like. That word logos was enough for describing what knowledge is. But to have that joined with episteme was a strange thing, which some Scottish thinker in the 18th century did perhaps. But there was a reason for that, and let me mention what that reason was. Because episteme is also knowledge. Episteme is the building block of knowledge. I mean, if I were to do a good Hindi or Indian language translation of episteme, the building block of knowledge, I would use the term the Artha Shila, the building block, the cornerstone of knowledge. That is, Artha Shila means episteme. Episteme. Then why at all bring episteme with logos? That was knowledge of knowledge. And the reason for this conjecture, this bringing together these two terms, rather odd combination of similar meaning two terms, and the English is not very generous with such terms. In Indian languages we have गड़बड़ होता है वगैरह वगैरह, झटपट होता है. English is very frugal with such terms. But the reason was, in the 17th century, a French thinker had, as a result of what had happened in recent history of his times, come out with a formulation which read, I think, therefore I am. This was René Descartes. I think and therefore I am. That is, to bring in skepticism, to bring in thought, to bring in what later people call reason or rationality, to question was the proof of existence of the consciousness. This was Descartes' take. Now, why did Descartes get into this kind of very odd formulation? The reason was obviously that just about 6 or 7 decades before his times, the Protestants had rebelled against the established church. And that rebellion was not just simply, as my history textbooks told me in my childhood, that one King Henry decided to marry for the 3rd time, and the Pope did not approve of that, therefore decided to set up a new church. That was not the reason. The reason was that thinkers prior to Descartes, such as Saint Thomas Aquinas, had described this world, described this I'm using the term this, but if I were a Sanskrit Pandit, I were a Vedic Pandit, I would have used the term that. Tat. Tat. Not iti. Not this. The Thomas Aquinas and scholars like him had described this world, the phenomenal world, the world that the consciousness sees, not the consciousness, but what the consciousness grasps, as a nature-made order, something which is created but is not chaotic, it has an order. So it is nature's order. And it was the rebellion against that idea of nature's order was necessary, because the idea of nature's order had given legitimacy to kingship. The rebellion, the Protestant rebellion, was not just about not liking a pope, but it was also in part about not liking the king, the state, the structure of the state. And so if you don't accept what is made in nature as an order, then you have to have something else to posit in that place, and therefore you say it is the human agency, is the human rationality that's organizing the reality as we see it, we grasp it, and we shall analyze it. That analysis of knowing became epistemology, logos of episteme, knowledge of knowledge. Soon after that, a contemporary, a little junior contemporary of Descartes, that is John Locke, proposed a new idea of the state. He said everybody must learn to respect other people's freedom, so that collectively you will give security, economic security to them, and they shall give economic security to you. Nobody shall rob you of your wealth, and you shall not rob others of their wealth. These kind of people form a political society, and if such a political society gets organized, then a new idea called democracy will emerge. Locke turned the demos into a replacement for nature. That's the whole business of where this epistemology is arising from. Knowledge, we need to know about our knowledge, that our consciousness must think of how we think. And in fact, all the disciplines of knowledge got impacted by this, to the extent that if you go to, as Katya's subject, biology, description of the brain today is given as human brain is a recursive brain. It is that brain which is capable of thinking about thought. I gave all this background just to say that it is not just the Romans, the Europeans, the Greeks who had been trying to think about the foundation of knowledge, but there are others who are thinking about it. And in our side, our part of the world, South Asia, India, call it India, we had jnana, or as you say, jnana in Hindi, and vidya. Jnana was always a verbal action, not verbal, like a verb. Vidya was something that can be learned from Jangad to the Jangad Bhashik. But jnana was to be inherited. Jnana had to be seen. Jnana was a visual thing. Vimuda nanu pashyanti jnana chakshusha. That's the verse in the Gita. That is, only those who are deluded shall not see jnana. It is for the jnani, the ones who have jnana, have vision. Jnana was epistemology, the knowledge about knowledge in this tradition was seeing it rather than perceiving it rather than internalizing it. They went a step further and said that this seeing comes to you not because somebody opens your eyes, but it just comes to you. And all that you see has always been there and shall be there. The same Gita, I don't like some parts of the Gita because they defend the Varnashram system, and I don't like it. But I'm quoting this, Nasate vidyato bhava na bhavo vidyate sata. It means all that you see has always been there, and there is nothing that you see shall never be there, etc., etc. Epistemologies differ from era to another era, from one culture to another culture, from one civilization to another civilization. But beyond and outside knowledge and gnosis, beyond and outside vidya and jnana, there is hardly another epistemology. If at all one wanted to give benefit of doubt, one could perhaps with some strenuous efforts name the Jaina concept of samvega. And some of you might have read Anand Kumar. I know Anand Kumar Swami is not such a fashionable name now, but pardon me for mentioning it. Anand Kumar Swami's essay on samvega, which is a moment when the consciousness becomes fluid. It becomes like a river, as in Vajpayeeji's poems. It starts flowing, and that's samvega. There's a beautiful essay called the shock of the shock of aesthesis. That is how he describes it. Aesthesis is the Greek word which is the foundation of aesthetics. Aesthesis means experience by the body, senses. That is aesthesis, and all that, any experience which the body likes is aesthetic. That is the Greek sense of it. I am trying to say that there is one way of looking at this question of indigenous resistance, epistemologies, and the contemporary framework of the normal, and that way is to see if the indigenous have some other epistemology or epistemologies. There is another way, and that is to see if the indigenous are contemporary, or a little behind us, or a little ahead of us. I, having seen and worked with so many Adivasi groups, tend to doubt my instinctive desire to describe their epistemologies as so distinct that they are different in kind, not just in degree, but kind. Altogether some another. Let me elaborate a little bit on this rather strange way of thinking that I am following. Who are the indigenous? Of course, this morning figures were given, 420 million, or maybe 500 million, or what, 50 crore. The Indian figures, about 9% of Indian population is tribal population, or Janajatis as the government likes to call it. So some 1300 crores. Add to this another category called, and about which Chaitanya spoke very movingly, the nomads of the world. The nomadic communities in India, nomadic, semi-nomadic, and denotified communities, they count to 11 to 12 crores. There's some overlap, but between these 9% of Indian population, which are Adivasis, and another 10 or 11 crores of the nomads, they are about 20 crores, 200 million. Who are these people? Were they born as a genetically other? Were they people from some other planet, or others from some other planet who landed here? We do not have enough work done on these questions till today. But let me very briefly mention a few relevant things. In recent times, you might have come across books like Tony Joseph's Early Indians. If not, let me mention that in the last 25-30 years, a good amount of work on early humans is carried out by scientists belonging to a field called human genetics. They've gone through gene samples, DNAs and all that, collected in Hyderabad's laboratories, cellular and microbiology, CCMB or whatever it is called. They come to the conclusion that all of us in South Asia belong to the same stock of mothers. Our fathers came from different places. No, this is what genetics tells us. Same. Okay. Before I come to this, let me add that the Homo sapien, having stepped out of Africa, moved all over the world to distant places, came to our part of the world some 65,000 years ago. More so in the southern part of India and also the Himalayan foothills. A second wave of migration came from, say, Iran, what is Iran today. Yet another wave of migration came from Central Asia, which also brought, the numbers were not large, small numbers, but they brought in a language which we call Indo-Aryan, much later. But this first wave of migration, which brought human population here, what the genetics people call modern humans, that is belonging to the last, say, 20,000 years or so. They had survived very long cold periods, which are known in history as interglacials, and particularly a particularly long period of about 7,000 years, which started some 18,000 years before our time, ended about 11,500 years before our time. And those who remained, they flourished because the temperatures had risen. And when temperatures went up, from the ground sprang grass, and came insects, and then more birds, and because there are birds, more animals, and because all these insects, birds, animals, grass, everything was there, humans who were in hiding in caves, like say Bhimbetka, for instance, or there are smaller caves all along the mountain range in central part of India. In Orissa, plenty of those are located. In Gujarat, there are many. Near my Adivasi Academy, there's one. And people came out of that. They flourished, their population increased. These people, over the last 12,000 years, 11,000 years, have been in India. They formed initially hunting, gathering communities, but they were clans. Then from the hunter-gatherers, they became pastoral nomads, and these were also clans, but better defined clans. Their animals were known to them and to others, and therefore they had this, the term Gotra is a clan having certain number of cows becomes Gotra, and marrying inside the clan is not allowed, but marriage outside is allowed. Therefore Sagotra marriage is not allowed, but marriage of distant Gotra within similar kind of profession is caste is allowed. I mean, this is I'm not, I just don't like these terms, quite frankly. But I'm presenting them to make a point. These formed, then they slowly took to agriculture. And that happens about 6,000-7,000 years before our time. And the unique fundamental model of Indian village emerges with hundreds and thousands of people in hundreds and thousands of villages speaking hundreds and thousands of languages. They're there. The city culture, Indus culture, arises just about 4,500 years before our time and ends in 1900 BC, that is 4,000 years. After 500 years gap is there, then the Vedas come, nomads come, and so on. With the Vedic civilization emerges, not immediately, but soon after, some 700 or 800 years after Rig Veda, emerges the idea of the state. Some of our people picked up the idea, the others did not. The Vedas were misunderstood some 600 or 700 years after their compositions. And Aurobindo Ghosh says that 700 years after the Rig Veda was written, nobody understood what it meant. And so everybody started thinking that something very great is written in that. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. But this uska jo Gaud Bengal, Marathi mein se, a lot of unnecessary aura got attached to it, and that aura was used to conceptualize the social hierarchy, the Varna. Some decided to stay out of the Varna system. In our country today, if you are a Jati, you cannot be a tribe. If you are a tribe, you cannot be a Jati. Do you know somebody who is a tribal, also belongs to a caste? Of course, there may be some aberration because our country is full of exceptions, but the norm. So those who did not succumb to the Varna hierarchy and remained outside and continued to be so until our time are the tribes. Are they more indigenous than the others? They are not more indigenous in calendar time, but they are more indigenous in mental time. That way to understand. The second thing I want to, I traveled in Europe, in many countries, and barring a few, I don't see tribal people in France, in England, in Germany, and so on. Why is it that there are no tribes in Europe, but the indigenous in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Africa, and in Asia, and South America? The reason is, where the colonized went and exterminated the local communities, the remaining lot of the local got described as the indigenous or aboriginals or Maoris or the Indians or Janajatis or tribals or whatever you like. Tribal is not an innate characteristic of the communities. It is a description attached to some communities as a consequence of the colonial experience, which wherever it went, wherever it was experienced, there was a termination. But in places like India, where the population is large and the size is large, not all communities, the Europeans got exterminated. When Europeans came here first, the Portuguese, they were using the term tribe for every Indian community. Now, in some sense, your ancestors 300 or 400 years ago were tribals in the eyes of the Portuguese. But slowly, those communities that were helping the government were exempted. And so the term tribe was used for the outer ring of the society, the inner ring, the inner circle closer to the government. They accepted these names and so on, whatever names people propose. And things like using a family name, surname was imposed on us. We did not have that practice. Finally, the last straw, as we say. In the 19th century, Europe fought wars. Germany and Britain, France and Germany, France and Britain. And a stage came, particularly after the Franco-Prussian War, that when Germany had newly become a nation, united nation, along one language, how dreadful, because later on it is Italy and Germany who became nation along one language, became fascist nations in Europe. So one language formula is a deadly formula, please remember. In Germany decided to have a larger navy, but its access to the sea is restricted due to climate. In the northern parts, you can't have put too many, during winter. It's not a good time for putting more ships there. Germany therefore decided to have more timber, to make more boats, and created its forest department. In retaliation, Britain created its forest department, but Britain had no land. So Britain created its forest department in India. 1860s, 1864, they brought some 1500 foresters from Burma to mainland India. Now, from where was the land to come? By then, the British had signed treaties with the princes here, and all the states that had signed treaties or contracts with the British, their land was governed directly or indirectly by the British. But if there were people who had not formed the state, how would the British control them? The people who did not get into the Varna fold and did not form the state. Such communities were plenty. Overnight, through a single act, the British declare all of those as the land where these people were staying, living, all the land was declared as sovereign domain, under sovereign domain. And the communities in that area were listed and named as tribes. This is history. If you look up the medieval literature of India, say Kabir, Tukaram, Tulsidas, whatever, Nanak, Krishna Chaitanya, whichever medieval writer, do you find mention of tribes? You find mention of forests. You find mention of forest dwellers. The term tribe was imported. It had come in use in Africa quite a lot. The British brought it here and started using it for our communities. Now, I am saying that the long history of India shows that the tribals are not, they are a product of the colonial rule. They are not, in terms of calendar time, they are not more indigenous or less indigenous. All of us are here. I mean, our ancestors go back to some 60,000, 65,000 years ago. We have been here. all of us are brothers and sisters in a way. It's a terrible thing to say, but that's what genetics is telling me. But this colonial product also created a supporting colonial imagination, which got a branch called anthropology flourishing. Australia was already there, and the French and the German anthropologists and the British anthropologists were working there. In India, we don't see late 19th century description of tribes at all in any literature. The earliest description we get is Verrier Elwin or Heimendorf, and that's fairly 2-3 decades deep into the 20th century. How do we then understand if the tribes think differently, live differently, act differently, that they have different epistemologies than the epistemologies of others? Well, going by my description, one can say those who did not opt for any kind of narrow nationalism were tribes. Those who did not opt for any hierarchy, social hierarchy, were tribes. Those who did not opt for authority and terror for controlling society were tribes. That much I can accept. But beyond that, I shall not say that tribes were from the Mars and the rest of Indians were from Venus. What I am saying is the British act of creation of these communities was very cruel. They did not stop at that by uprooting everybody, taking the possession of the land and making them tenants in the land which they owned. Even today, tribes are seen as, I am in a city and I pay tax to the government for having land. The tribes are in the areas where they pay fines to the forest department for cultivating in the lands which they had been cultivating all along. They are temporary tenants. They are not allowed to dig deep inside the earth. Their right ends at the surface of the earth. That's why irrigation is less in tribal area. Anyway, I am trying to say that at the moment, the world, the entire world, is looking at a very terrifying future. For some people, it's a very glorious future. On one side, you heard of Dyson shell. There was a mathematician. There was a Russian astronaut who said that, if we can get a lot of energy from the sun, then our life will be better. We will have more machines to work for us. We will have to do less labor. So some mathematician actually calculated how much energy we will get if we build a shell around the earth which opens and shuts using a remote. So this is called Dyson shell. And actually tenders are floated to build the Dyson shell around the earth. If we can capture, through that, if we capture all the energy coming from the sun, it will be at least 1 trillion times more than the energy you have. So in this room there are 10 lights. You can have 10 trillion lights in this room. You can travel, from Noida to the Parliament House. It takes 3 hours now. You can travel with trillion type energy even in 2 hours 20 minutes. You can actually have breakfast here, go to the Mars, come back for lunch. That is the dream. That is limitless growth, limitless energy, limitless control of the space outside the earth. And for that, technologies of communication, which are not dependent on sound, air, because air is necessary for, but on digits. So in interplanetary communication, digits are useful. This is one vision, and more than half the people on this earth actually subscribe to this vision, that that's how life shall be. There is another half which feels that all the tipping points we crossed, and we are deep in the climate crisis, and that the rate of destruction of the species is something like 4,000 times than the rate of destruction at the time of the last glacial. And so we will exhaust all the resources on the earth, and one day this earth will be charred, a graveyard. Species will have gone, all diversity will disappear, and humans obviously will also be extinct. These are two scenarios. Many people, thinkers, artists, writers, believe that neither one nor the other is a desirable future for humans. Many of us believe and like to think that what we inherited from the past needs to be taken forward, that all the valuable things that a Michelangelo or a Kalidas or M.F. Hussain need to go forward to the next generation. Now, at such a juncture, this, neither the greatly optimistic and greedy, more energy walas, nor the people who are very morose and despondent and pessimistic that the earth is going to be finished tomorrow, or if not tomorrow. I mean, if I was lecturing in January in Delhi, this would have been more convincing, because air and everything becomes, but if not tomorrow, but very soon. But people who are reasonable, who want some future for our children, and not that we rob all of the future from our children, they see some other challenges before us. And one is that while over the last 70,000 years, humans have been creative, they use language, they use imagination, possibly this ability might be robbed by artificial memory. When humans surrender their responsibility of remembering to an artificial memory chip, they not just surrender the responsibility of remembering the name of the name of the shop you visited yesterday, or how much bill you have to pay to the electricity company or gas company, but they also give up their conceptualization of the past, and therefore they give up their conceptualization hold over myth. If myth dies, then as if the sense of the past dies, if memory dies, then humans won't be any different from cyborgs. They'll be half machine, half human. And that's a real challenge before us. Similarly, with imagination. Now, if memory is the mechanism that the human brain invented for first conceptualizing time and then controlling time, because time does not exist. Time is something that humans have visualized. I don't know if other animals have same sense of time, whether they say that we are in the year 2025, something, I don't know. Squirrels don't do that. Neither do ants. Similarly, if the imagination, if ChatGPT and Meta starts doing your work of imagination, then there are consequences for the human brain. And let me explain what they are. The meta is a short form of the word called metaverse. If you go to a library, you see books, and then you say library catalog. books are the library, and catalog is the metadata for the library. It is about the library. Metaverse is about this universe. In the metaverse, based on your available videos, like today photographs were taken, based on those photographs, somebody can create you in the metaverse. And even when you are no more there, and I hope not, I'm talking of a distant future, even when you are not there, somebody from metaverse can send you an email in your name. I mean, send me an email in your name, as if you exist in metaverse. That is, metaverse is ending the possibility of end of the universe. And with that possibility of the end of the universe, ends the possibility of imagination. Because imagination can take birth, survive only in the middle of, as the Greek philosophers would have said, in the middle of shadow and light. The Greeks had a big problem with this shadow and light, because they felt there is a universe above which is filled with light. There are holes there from where light percolates, and we see that as the stars we see is the proof of that. There's another universe of darkness. The Greeks had great fear of the shadow. In Plato's writing, you have this caveman getting scared with his shadow and so on. The imagination thrives only in the middle zone, where shadow and light are together, where certainty and uncertainty are together. If a metaverse gives you permanent guarantee of permanent existence in a non-existent universe, the imagination that we have is going to be over. It will be deceased. People who don't want to see this earth getting charred and us getting, humans and species getting extinct, and people who don't believe in this crazy idea of perpetual growth, are today thinking of our heritage, our inheritance, in new terms. And that is, they are not looking at metaverse or getting silence by artificial memory, but they are looking at not contemporary, but the future forms of art. In my opinion, the indigenous is a state of the mind, I may not be born a Chenchu or a Bhil or a Gondi or whatever, but I may still have an indigenous like mental aptitude, attitude, relation to the earth. And what is that relation? It says, the earth does not belong to me, I belong to the earth. And in that saying, I belong to the earth is not a thing, but it's a kind of state of time. And that's why every tribal community, every indigenous community, Australia, New Zealand, wherever, has a story of Genesis. The earth is all time bound together. It does not belong to me, I belong to it. I am a creature of time. That's the indigenous state of mind. I am saying that the question is not before us whether the indigenous art is contemporary. The question is, what is contemporary art? And what will be art in future? And we know, but we are not saying it frankly, that the indigenous art forms, that what we call indigenous art forms today, see, Picasso had an indigenous artist in him. That's why he became Picasso. And Valmiki had an indigenous writer in him, that's why he could create that drama, and you know that. I am not talking of indigenous by birth, by identity card, by Aadhaar card, by caste name or community name. I am talking of the indigenous mind frame is the mind frame of the future artists. And because the art world knows this, it is actually raising this question. The art world is nervous. A new futuristic art is coming our way. And where shall we stand? William Jones. I think, some 50 years back, 60 years back, when I was a student, university student, people used to discuss, is Indian English literature? How shall we describe it? R.K. Narayan, Nayantara Sehgal. Today, it is the literature. What we call today indigenous art is the future of human imagination. It is the future art for humanity, and knowing that, and I will tell you why, particularly because the South is rising and the West is going down. The art capitals in the West are now thinking about, what about indigenous art? What is the epistemology? It's simple. Anybody who has a mental indigenous state today, forget about your caste, community, region, where you are born, mentally indigenous, you belong to the future because you believe that you belong to the earth does not belong to you. I will conclude with a story if I have 2-3 minutes, or have I exceeded time already? You might have heard the name of a Bengali writer called Mahashweta Devi. I worked with her for several decades, and we were trying to find out where the nomadic communities in India are. We're trying to fight for their rights. So once we decided to undertake a long train journey from Surat to Vidarbha. Now this was the time when in Maharashtra a strange epidemic was noticed. The government appointed a committee. In that, children were dying. Lots of children were dying. So government appointed a committee. The committee said, this is a genetic disease. It's called sickle cell disease, sickle cell anemia. We cannot do anything because people have inherited it. What can we do? And many tribal communities show that signature of sickle cell. Some doctors came, they said some research is done in Europe, in Africa, and let's try that particular medicine. And these doctors came and went away to attend conferences in Geneva and Chicago. The children continued to die. So I traveled with Mahashweta Devi to one such area where Korkus, people in Maharashtra will know, Korkus, Amravati, near Amravati, Korkus live. And we saw the situation. After some days, Mahashweta Devi went to Calcutta and she telephoned me. She said, what is the most common name in Maharashtra for a boy? I said, Mahadev, Ram, whatever, Pramod. So she picked up that name, Mahadev, short form, Mahadu. And she wrote a story. I am going to narrate that story to you very briefly. The Korkus land was taken away by the British for laying the Surat-Howrah railway line. And in exchange, this is the story, Mahashweta's story. In exchange, the British gave them some horrible land which could not be cultivated, and therefore there were no crops. And so the Korkus were hungry, and their stature started going down, and they were dying. And some doctor came there and said, in Africa, with an injection, people's stature had increased, height had increased. Let me try. The doctor went away. But the Korkus continued to die. They were very dignified. And so they decided that they will not cry when somebody dies. Rather, when one's time has come, one will go, they make a hut. One will go and sit in that hut, waiting for the ultimate to happen. The last boy is remaining. His name is Madhu. Madhu is waiting for his time to come. And suddenly he hears the whistle of the train coming from Calcutta to this side, Western India. And As that whistle comes, this boy starts smelling the fragrance of the trees that the British had chopped for laying the railway, what is it called, sleepers, wooden blocks. And though he had not eaten for months together because there was no food, suddenly he jumps and runs to the train, gets into it, and it takes him to some place. There he sees, it's a big city. It's Bombay. It takes him to Bombay. There he sees a strange thing. That thing is food. And on seeing food, he starts eating. And he eats all that is available in Bombay, including the boot building, the Rajabai Tower building, Ambani's house, whatever, Antilia. He eats everything. And because the doctor had given some injection, he keeps growing tall. The doctor went to attend conference in Geneva. Madhu's head touches the sky. Then he bends down slowly and drinks the Arabian Sea. And having satisfied himself, he raises both his hands, plucks the stars in the sky, and starts writing with both his hands a new history of the world all over again. A new history of the world is beginning to be written, and what we think is indigenous art is the first salvo in that direction. All my artist friends, curator friends, museologists, art critics, please know that we have to think of what our epistemologies have been and correct them, and then we might be able to march with the tribals into future which the humankind needs and deserves. Thank you so much.
Hello. I feel a little bit breathless, actually, after having heard this epic expose that you have shared with us. I am in deep awe and admiration. So I thank you, first and foremost.
Thank you.
Most deeply.
Thank you.
For your words and your thoughts. I am so struck by this last story, the image of Madhu's head touching the sky, then bending forward and drinking the Arabian Sea, and then beginning to write with his hands a new story for the world. And you spoke so eloquently about the construction of indigeneity through colonialism, but you also opened up this thought about indigenous mental state as being the point. And I really feel inspired by your thoughts that what we call indigenous art in the space of the art world is actually the future of human imagination. And I'm particularly struck by this idea that actually that indigenous mental state is what is leading. Because for me, what this does is it brings me back to the beginning of this symposium, to the moment when I was talking about the three concepts which I thought would recur through the symposium: the question of ancestrality, coloniality, and the contemporary. And I think you have given us, more beautifully than one could imagine, precisely that picture. That ancestrality is not a tradition stuck in the past, of no use, a cobweb in a corner, but actually it is alive and it's guiding our future. And it is so imperative that all of our mental states embrace that as a way forward. So I know we have not very much time left, and so I tried to create into a little nutshell just my immediate reflections on your very beautiful expose. And I think the best thing I can do now is really open up to you and really ask you, welcome you to bring any questions forward for Professor Devi. So please.
Thank you so much, Professor Devi. Like, I'm very happy to listen to your talks and lectures that you has mentioned how the colonials has labels about the tribe. Even in the previous sessions also, when Khushboo Jain has talked about the folk. So like when we remember about Alandandas, that who are the folk, then among us we are the folk. So it's reminded. And when you are talking about the worldviews, the epistemology of the tribes, I also belong from a tribe from Assam. And I don't know whether you remember or not, we had a conversations through mails, and you said that, oh my God, you are going to miss the Karbis, the worldviews of all that. So I belong from that. So I'm very fortunate to meet you today and listen to your talks. And, I can understand how, being a tribal, so like when they say, we also don't accept. We try to say rather indigenous, because, it's a very, we don't like to listen in that word. So I just wanted to share with you that only, so nothing slight questions. But anyway, nice to meet you, Professor Devi. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm overwhelmed by your affection. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just add one point, if there is no question. I apologize. Sorry,
No.
forgive me.
So yeah, thank you so much. So my question is, I have written, so then it can be crisp. So thank you for your talk and for sharing insights supported by scientific data on the people of this land. I would like to understand the data you are presenting in relation to the mythological stories that depict the theme of, Burai par achai ki jeet. So the victory of good over evil, such as the killing of Mahishasura and King Bali. For instance, Mahatma Phule in Gulamgiri and other anti-caste writings interprets these mythological narratives as political tools. He highlights how figures like fair-skinned Vamana or Durga killing Asuras are symbolic of the subjugation of the indigenous people of this land. So I would like to hear your views on these, like the mythological stories. How would you like to connect these?
Yeah, the myths that we call are myths are a mix of our Prakrut memories and the Dravidic memories and Sanskrit memories. So our myths have both things together. I mean, at Diwali, we have Bali Raja, this, Bali Pratipada is actually the southern rebellion and resistance to the north that's embodied there. And I agree with, Mahatma Phule was a great soul, Absolutely. I mean, he's for me almost godlike. Uh, so I am with you on that count. But let me add something different. I said that this mythos, since the question was about, which was promoted by the divine order, the nature's order, Saint Thomas Aquinas. It was all myths were created to defend that order. When demos came in for democracy, rationality came in, and in the name of rationality, lot of violence also came in. Today, all over the world, democracies appear to have failed. The Economist newspaper journal in England gives yearly analysis of successful democracies, failed democracies. In the last 2024 listing, not more than 9% democracies exist as democracies. Others are failed or terrible or autocracies. Many people think that resisting this kind of autocracy, authoritarian state, using the established values of democracy might be a way forward. I believe that democracy is an evolving system, and the next phase of democracy will be cosmocracy, where tribal art, indigenous thinking, belonging to the earth, representing all of the species in the parliament will become necessary. And that might give our regimes and systems a new lease of life where we can have open societies. That is, my answer to your question is, of course, I can get into the myths and say myth by myth, which one is right, which one is not, which myth represents whatever. That work is done by people like, people from Deccan Institute in Pune quite a lot. My thoughts are at the moment as to what will happen to this world. And for this world to have a future, we need a better democracy. We need open societies. And those that opening of the society, opening of the mind of the society will be made possible by the arts and philosophies, both arts and philosophies, which has the indigenous, by which I don't mean the indigenous by tribe and caste. I think any indigenous community which harps on the ethnicity of that community is self-destructive. It destroys its own future and the future of the world. The indigenous communities of the world must unite, like Marx had said at one time, workers of the world unite. And indigenous is a mental state. Such people should unite and create new forms of art, new forms of visualization, new presence of imagination, and new space for memory. Memory is what controls time. Imagination is what creates space. So we need a new memory, new imagination, new arts, new thoughts for a new kind of open society, open life. That's my hope. So I'm not speaking as an art critic. I don't have the qualifications. If I appear for any art criticism examination, I'll fail in the 3rd grade or 5th grade or whatever. Thank
you. I just wanted to add, actually, you've really inspired me with this word cosmocracy. And it made me think of this First Nations scholar called Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who wrote a very beautiful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And there are 2 quotes there that I'd just like to share with you. The first quote reads in this way: in the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with of course the human being on the top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience and how to live, and thus the most to learn. we must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live. They teach us by example. They've been on the earth far longer than we have been and have had time to figure things out. I think somehow this really resonates with your thought of cosmocracy and where we need to learn, who we need to look for, what we need to look for that learning, for that change of mental state.
Cosmocracy is a political philosophy coming from Australia, by the way. John Keane, his last book, recent book on short history of democracy is pointing to that. I shall be publishing my book on democracy and cosmocracy next year. But I want to, can I have your permission to thank you for making me think? Because while thinking about democracy and cosmocracy and all I had not given enough thought of the role the arts will play there. And coming here, I realize that this is a great transformative energy you are unleashing. It may not be taken note of instantly in tomorrow's newspapers, but long time from now, it will be taken note of that this was a turning point. Thank you.
Thank you, but I must say, the unleashment is a collective process, and everybody in this room has provided that unleashment today. So this is a very beautiful note. Our collective unleashment. Let us finish the day on that very beautiful collective note. And please join me in giving a very warm thank you to the most phenomenal exposé by Professor Devi.